Welcome to Directors Club. My name is Bill Ackerman, and I'm guest hosting today, so no Jim, Patrick, Al, or Brad. What this is, so Jim and I had done episode 193 on Abel Ferrara, and at the time, Lionsgate had offered us a screener to review for Zeros and Ones, Abel Ferrara's new film. Jim can't make it today, but so what I chose to do was bring in a friend and fellow film writer, Chris O'Neill, who's a filmmaker. He's a documentarian, does scripted narrative and experimental films. He's a writer, like I said. He's written for Senses of Cinema, Hysteria Lives, Experimental Conversations. He's worked in film distribution. He's been a film programmer for 20 years. He's the head of the cinema at Triskel Christchurch since 2011. And he's a prolific video essay contributor for labels like Imprint, Severn Films, 88 Films, Mondo Macabro, Fun City Editions, BFI, I think now Vinegar Syndrome and Blue Underground. It's Chris O'Neill, and he was someone I knew was a fellow Abel Ferrara fan, and so I thought he would be a great person to speak with about this interesting new film. So how you doing, Chris?
Good, thanks, and I was delighted to get to see the new Abel Ferrara film for this chat, so A, I get to see it, B, I get to talk about it and work out what exactly it is I saw afterwards.
Yes. Now, I think we were saying before the recording how this is kind of a challenging film in some ways. I mean, I think it's being sold as more of a straightforward political thriller, and roughly the story, such as we can describe it briefly, is it's a story where Ethan Hawke is playing an American soldier who's in lockdown Rome during a pandemic, and he's involved in a kind of a plot trying to prevent a terrorist bombing of the Vatican, and Hawke also plays his the soldier's twin brother, an imprisoned political revolutionary. And like I said, it's being presented as something almost like a Bourne Identity kind of nail-biting action thriller, and it's really a lot more mysterious and contemplative than that. So now, this is the first time you're seeing it as well, Chris. What was your first impressions of it as a longtime Abel Ferrara fan?
Well, what was interesting was in Ireland, we just had the Cork International Film Festival. So after the final shift that I had been working at Triskel, because my cinema is one of the venues involved, came home quite late, started watching the screener. And that, in a weird way, was absolutely perfect because my strange after midnight slightly blurry, tired feelings sort of felt perfect for what was happening in the movie. Does that make any sense?
It does.
Because the movie, like, to sum it up in a way that is marketable, yes, it sounds like an espionage thriller, but by the end of it, I was thinking it was more like a stream of consciousness, dystopian kind of dream state film or something. That sounds quite peculiar, but it has this weird kind of blurry, slightly 3 a.m., but you're buzzing and awake, like somebody is leaving a bar at 3 a.m., but they're sober, but they're sort of tired, and everyone else is around them is sort of out of it, but you're sharp, but you just want to get home. And it's a really weird analogy, but it has this unique mood to it that made it really quite eerie and quite incredibly atmospheric. I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm going off on a kind of a weird stream of consciousness sort of thing trying to describe it, but does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, so it's shot pretty much all at night. They had access to the lockdown Rome after hours, but they could only shoot over the course of the night and I think at dawn. So they had certain restrictions, and so you have this kind of dark nighttime ambiance to it, and then it's Sean Price Williams was the DP on this, and you might have seen him shooting things for I think the Safdies. I think he shot. What did he shoot? Is it Good Time? I know he shot a lot of the Alex Ross Perry films, but he shot a few documentaries for Abel Ferrara. This is the first narrative film. I think he shot Mulberry Street, but he he brings like a handheld, almost like stolen feeling to the shot sometimes. I don't know if you agree. Like it felt like they were just capturing this, like it's a dramatic situation that they're in because the city feels like it's under some kind of lockdown.
It's almost like, obviously they filmed it during the lockdown of the pandemic, but it feels more like a city under martial law or something, like a lockdown via government armed forces taking over the streets or something, and the eeriness of that kind of empty streets and things. It's really quite. It's almost like using something like genre to capture a mood of a non-genre real situation that we were going through when the film was shot. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, I always think of the way he uses urban location to express a theme of, well, in this case, I think just a feeling of alienation. The way that the restrictions of COVID have kind of rendered all human interaction in terms of the masks and the distancing. It's just using that to create like the alienated feeling of noir, or even like the kind of, I thought of like the conspiratorial thrillers of the 1970s, like that feeling of mistrust, and you're playing into a time when you have a lot of conspiratorial thinking, and this is dealing with themes of like fake news or not believing what you're seeing because we're dealing in images that can be so easily manipulated.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to I suppose you can go back to Dangerous Game to some extent, the way what's fiction and what's reality. But in particular, I was thinking of New Rose Hotel.
Same,
Yeah, because there's a lot of specific video imagery in that. And that was a movie shot on celluloid film, but there was a lot of video imagery mixed in, night vision and grainy and kind of blurry security camera footage, and the sense, and also the fact that footage can be manipulated and cut a different way to tell different stories and events, and also how that film was a film where it takes place in different parts of the world, but it's usually interiors and in different hotel rooms or bars or whatever. And while this film has that going on as well to some extent in terms of, it's all set in Rome, but and there's a lot of events happening indoors, there's also this really eerie landscape outdoors as well. And also with Abel's with Tommaso and I think Siberia too. It's shot in a scope 2.35 image, and using the wider frame to make it feel more claustrophobic. Like I did a Q&A in January 2020 with Abel when Tommaso played in Dublin at a film festival, and I asked him, having just seen Tommaso, like, was that a conscious decision to shoot it in CinemaScope? And he just like treated it as an off the cuff, like he just said, "Oh, that was the DP, nothing to do with me." He just said it, and that kind of goes with sometimes Abel's kind of he's really earthy and doesn't necessarily think about some of this stuff, but of course he does, because he knows exactly what he's doing, and I'm sure it was a very calculated decision because, on one hand he said that was the DP doing that, but he also said, well, that's just everything shot in scope now, because once upon a time to shoot in scope, you needed the lenses, you needed the film stock, and, it was all these different elements where scope also had to be shot in certain locations where you'd be able to fit in the locations because big cameras and things, whereas now you can shoot wide images in very small, tight locations. So obviously there's that as well, but with these films he's been doing that have been in scope recently, like I said, the world opens up more, but you still get the sense of a claustrophobia. And in this film as well, there's moments where the more the camera zooms into something, it, instead of it getting more detailed, it gets more grainy and difficult to make out. And becomes quite abstract, which is, when you think about it, like the whole concept of the Antonioni film Blow Up. The more you focus on something, the more you look at something, the more inconclusive the answer you're seeking becomes,
Yeah. And I asked him about that in the interview that will be part of this episode. And he had a great answer for that, because I noticed that as well, like that tendency for the camera to push in too far. So it becomes, like an abstract image, and you're getting less clarity the more you investigate the image.
Yeah, and it was interesting when I was watching the film, because I suppose, just to pull back a little bit, we're talking about almost like mood, and we're talking about imagery and things like that. But just to pull back, there is a narrative there is a story there, but I found myself, when I was watching it, not really focusing too much on the story, and just seeing how things were unfolding, and trying to, not trying to do anything other than just see where it was going, not trying to decipher it necessarily. I just kind of like, it feels like the espionage plot, the kind of, the thriller element, whatever, is there to kickstart this story, but ultimately it is about capturing a mood, a feeling, and paranoia, distrust, distance, isolation, all elements that are very human elements, but being told with some sort of genre backstory to make it a project that is like a 80-something minute movie. Yes, 86, 87 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
And, and that's what I always liked about Ferrara's films, because, throughout his career, a lot of especially the earlier films, would be genre films, but there was always something else going on, like Driller Killer or Miss 45, even Bad Lieutenant, is ultimately, in theory, like a cop thriller, like a lone renegade cop thriller, but it isn't, there's several of his films that they can be sold one way, but they go another way. And that's what I think's kind of really going on here, and as far as I know, maybe I'm getting this mixed up, but I know Ethan Hawke and Abel Ferrara they did the Chelsea on the Rocks documentary some years ago, and I think they were talking about trying to do another project since. So in a weird way, it almost seemed like this dual thing of, okay, while lockdown's happening, why don't we make this film where we take advantage of the empty streets? But also I get the sense and let's take advantage of Ethan Hawke not doing anything for a while, where I can actually shoot a film with him. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but that's what I kind of thought,
You're right. And it's funny, I think I had heard, and I don't know if this is accurate, I had heard that he was originally, they were talking about having him play the lead in 444 Last Day on Earth, which for me is where the Dafoe collaborations become really interesting, because then it becomes Willem Dafoe as Abel Ferrara surrogate. I mean, both that and Tommaso feel like cousins in a way, in that they both feel so autobiographical and so much about his concerns in life at that time, that I was watching this one knowing that it was really one of the only ones that he's the only credited screenwriter of. There's usually collaborators, even something like Bad Lieutenant or Mary. I mean, I think everything after Nicholas St. John, stopped writing the screenplays for him. I think he's the co-writer of so many of them. I don't know what his writing process is like, but this is the least overtly autobiographical of the narrative films that he's the sole screenwriter on. But, I wonder how much he's just trying to get ideas out through the two Ethan Hawke characters in this. I mean, if the dueling ideologies are him talking about his own views indirectly under the guise of a political thriller. And I thought it was interesting how he's using documentary footage of Ethan Hawke out of character to kind of add context, both clarifying the narrative at the beginning and then clarifying the ideas at the end. But you've already been given a whole film about distrusting the image. So are these genuine documentary scenes, or is this something that's manipulating us in a different way?
Well, yeah, because when I first saw the introduction at the beginning, with it being Ethan Hawke on what appeared to be, in terms of quality and presentation, like a Skype or a Zoom recording, and it's not the character, but hi, I'm Ethan Hawke, and you're about to watch this movie, and we shot it under COVID lockdown, etc. At one point, I was kind of going, okay, why is this here? Is this here to give a sense of time and place of what they were doing? Or more cynically, I was going, well, because maybe this is an unusual film, or there might be certain elements of it that, you know, the audience are not going to get what they're expecting from it. Are they almost trying to set up that under the situation that the film was shot, it's not going to be conventional or something, or it's almost like a bit of a, you know, just so you know, guys, you know, something like that. And I was kind of going, I don't know what to think about that. Like I was dwelling on it a lot while watching the film, and won't obviously spoil what happens at the very end, but at the very end we return to this Ethan Hawke as himself Zoom recording after the credits. And, you know, without going into too much detail, how that eventually resolves itself, at the very last moment, the very last thing said, it completely won me over, and the whole film clicked for me. And if I had missed that ending, I still would have liked it, but I don't know if it would have worked on the level that it did for me.
Yeah. I was talking to the writer Alexandra Heller-Nicholas about this film, and she wrote a great book on Miss 45 and did a video essay on the Driller Killer release from Arrow. And I know, I won't spoil the line, but I know that she finds the last line of Ethan Hawke out of character a rather haunting way to end the film. And I feel like that would be such an easy thing to miss, that segment, because it does come like an after the credits, you know, Marvel teaser, you know, which is not something you would expect from a film like this.
I mean, this might sound odd, but the only thing that at the very beginning, being a film person and, you know, noticing these things, if I remember correctly, the film opens with the logos of the different film companies involved, and then it goes to the recording. But if it had been the other way around, where it started with the Ethan Hawke recording at the very beginning and then the logos, you would actually treat it like one of these Zoom recording Q&A things that's going on online streaming during the pandemic, you know?
Yeah.
And it was the fact that it was after the logos and it was in the movie, that somehow tipped me off that something was interesting here, what's going on here. And and as I said, when I saw the very end of the film, I went, okay, right, I get it now, you know? So, and I'm being vague because I don't want to spoil the ending. I think people listening to this will want to just now see the whole thing from the very, from till the very end to know what we're talking about, and then we know what we're talking about.
I meant to ask you this beforehand, but just what was your history with the work of Abel Ferrara prior to seeing this? Like, what are your favorites? Do you have a favorite era? Like, what was your introduction to his work?
Well, in the early 90s in the UK and Ireland, Bad Lieutenant became quite a controversial film. I mean, it was a controversial film everywhere, where it played. But in the UK, it had... first of all, it started Harvey Keitel, who at the time had just done Reservoir Dogs. So suddenly Reservoir Dogs, this new Tarantino guy's film, was this major event which for some time wasn't available on video in the UK because long story short, there was a terrible crime and there was a resurgence of the idea that video and film violence could influence real violence. And for a brief period in the early mid-90s, several films were not banned, but they were just delayed getting video certificates. So Reservoir Dogs continued to play in the cinema for a long time before it was actually on video. I think it was 1994 or 1995, and when you consider the film came out theatrically, I think in the UK 92, that's quite a long distance of theatrical window to video. And Bad Lieutenant had this issue as well. And then to further that again, in Ireland, Bad Lieutenant was banned, just outright. So in the UK, the video was cut, but in Ireland, it was banned. So, and then after that, Abel's next film, Dangerous Game, was also banned in Ireland. So this stuff was going on, and you were interested because you couldn't see the movies. They were unavailable. I was too young. I couldn't go to see them in the cinema, or they weren't in the cinema because they were just banned. So, and then as time went on, I got to see the films, and initially some of them I didn't quite click with, but one of the earliest ones that I really liked, and it's not one that's considered his amongst a lot of people, it's a very divisive one, is Dangerous Game, or Snake Eyes as it was originally called, the movie making one with Madonna. Keitel and James Russo, and it's probably my favorite movie about movie making. It just really, there's something about it that always kind of gets under my skin when I see it. But so after that, I don't know. I mean, I just started trying to find all the films I could see of his. The Blackout, which was released in the UK and Ireland, and it didn't get released in the States for a long time. And then going back to the older movies. And the weird thing is, each era of Ferrara's filmmaking, they're all different, but I have favourites from each era which work for different reasons for me. Yeah. So I think, like, for example, my personal favourites, would be The King of New York, which every time I see that film, it just really, I just think it's such a perfect film in that kind of. I think there's a handful of movies that are just like perfect, like very few, to be honest. Even my favourite films, most of them are somehow messy or flawed or whatever. There's always something, but I always think of something like The Third Man as being a perfect film, and maybe The Maltese Falcon, a lot of those era of movies. But there's something about The King of New York. I just think it's absolutely incredible. And what's interesting is with that film, Ferrara's very precise with lighting and imagery and that kind of thing, and not improvising so much on camera, but improvising in the script process, so the dialogue's great and it's sharp, but it's very precise in its delivery because they've rehearsed it and all that. Whereas then after that, you go 360 and you're looking at Bad Lieutenant, which is all shot off the cuff around the streets in New York. Sometimes improvised with, it's kind of thin script and things. So King of New York, I think, is amazing. Obviously, Bad Lieutenant's great, but Dangerous Game really packs a punch. The Blackout, I think, is a masterpiece. It really gets disturbing each time I see it. It gets more and more disturbing. It really gets under my skin. I've always been a huge fan of New Rose Hotel, which to this day, I still find it absolutely bewildering how much bad press that film got and how much negativity and how much people hated it because, people genuinely believed that they ran out of money or something and they had to piece together the last half an hour of the movie from outtakes because it all unfolds in like a memory situation. And the thing is, the last half an hour of the movie, which everybody thinks is just made up of outtakes because they ran out of money, is actually the short story it's based on. Is that last half, that last third of the movie is the short story, the Gibson short story. So that film really I'm a big fan of that. Welcome to New York with Depardieu. Obviously I have a personal connection to that because two of the actors in that movie I've made films with myself since. Mm-hmm. So I really like that film, but it again just really packs a punch. And Siberia is one before the current one. I saw 2 or 3 times actually at the Berlin Film Festival, and especially seeing that on the big screen was absolutely incredible. I really liked that one. So there's some of my personal favorites, but there's so many, and there's so many documentary, narrative sort of movies. There's just so much out there, and of course there's several classics I'm not referencing, which are great, but they just don't hit me on that same personal level. Like Miss 45 is a great movie, China Girl, The Funeral. So and in recent years, my own personal other involvement, if you like, not involvement in the movies themselves, but in my cinema programming. Only 2 cinemas in Ireland showed Pasolini or Welcome to New York. And one of them was the Irish Film Institute in Dublin, and the other one was Triskel. My cinema, the only 2 cinemas in Ireland that showed those movies. My friendship with Brad Stevens, who wrote Abel Ferrara, The Moral Vision, which is probably the definitive book on Abel Ferrara's movies. My friendship began with having 2 copies of movies. It was The Driller Killer and Fear City that were different to the ones that Brad had written about in The Dark Side, and I let him know, and I sent him my copies that I had, and that started our friendship, with between those movies for his book. And like I said, last year I got to do the Q&A after Tommaso in Dublin with that film festival screening. So, and I genuinely believe, in terms of a filmmaker who's come from the era that he has, and of the body of work he has, and he's still making films, he's probably, to me, of that level of filmography, I think he would be like America's greatest living director, who's still working, who's still getting stuff made. And, each film, some work better than others occasionally, sure, but there's always something interesting to them. Yet they can be incredibly, split opinion. And and this one, zeros and ones, I could absolutely imagine a lot of people, even people who like his work, will go, I'm not sure about this. And that's kind of the fun of Abel Ferrara movies as well, because he doesn't always make stuff that even Abel Ferrara fans necessarily like, it's...
Yeah, no, I agree. And I thought, while watching this, having just done a major deep dive, I went through every Abel Ferrara film. I think the only things I didn't watch were the TV shows, the Miami Vice and Crime Story, but I watched everything from the short films up through Sport and Life. And I found something to appreciate about every single one of them. Like, there was not one film that I didn't think had some of interest to it, even ones that I wasn't crazy about growing up. Like, I was not, overly fond of like RX Smiths or China Girl. Some, like, growing up, now I really appreciate them a lot more. And even things like Driller Killer, which, when you go into it expecting Halloween kind of slasher movie, it's kind of confusing, but it's a great no wave type of thriller if you go into it right with the right expectations. And I thought about just that kind of grounding in what Ferrara does watching this, because I thought, even 10 minutes into it, like, this will appeal to his hardcore fans. I have no idea how it will play to people thinking of the film that they're imagining from the trailer. I feel like a lot of people are going to be very frustrated, and the word of mouth could reflect that, because it's not the thing that you think it's going to be if you're going in based on the trailer that is out there, or even the poster gives a certain kind of impression of something a lot more conventional than it really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I saw only today someone going, somebody on Twitter posting the DVD covers of Siberia, 444, and Zeros and Ones.
Yeah.
And there was a joke about how they look like very conventional films, but the films themselves are not like what the artwork proposes them to be. And, yes, we could laugh at these things, but at the end of the day, if that's what the people who have decided to release the movies have worked out as the way to sell them, then who cares? Because otherwise we wouldn't have them necessarily being released. And as we know, both on my side of the world and your side of the world, there was many years where Abel was making movies and they weren't being released, And so what's the problem with, if this gets the films out there and justifies their existence in the, to being released in the respective countries, what's the problem,
Yeah, no, I saw that, and I saw that tweet as well. That was Will Sloan, actually, from Important Cinema Club podcast. But I agree. I mean, he's making art films that are being sold like commercial genre films, and I think that that's always going to create a number of people that check this out because they have one expectation, and that expectation is thwarted. And, some people will be happily surprised that it's a lot more ambitious than what's being sold. But I would say like an equal number of people are going to be confused and maybe even angry.
Well, that's exactly what he did from the get-go with, his second film, The Driller Killer. I mean, in the UK, the film became a video nasty primarily because they took the image, like the one gory sort of money shot moment of the drill going in the guy's head, and they used that as the front cover of the video, and the film got, seized and prosecuted as a video nasty in the UK. Yet when you see the film, you realize that apart from that one scene and that one shot, it's more like a Polanski, new wave kind of influenced, new wave film, the New York new wave kind of aesthetic and vibe and budget and creation and everything. But then you got like, the likes of these other filmmakers, loftier, ambitious goals than just like some smaller scale, less ambitious horror movie. And by the way, that's not to slag off horror movies of that era and whatever. I don't mean it that way, but I just mean in terms of what the film was doing was overtly not like look, the great genre films of the 70s and other eras, they have agendas that are subtext with the horror scenes as the as the main fries of the plot. And the subtext is like, oh, if you look at this could be seen as a comment on the Vietnam War, or et cetera, et cetera. But The Driller Killer doesn't do that. It is what it is. It is this movie about like this artist's descent into madness. And when years later, after the video nasty issues died down in the UK and a lot of the previous video nasties were being reissued, they were coming back out again with cuts. And with The Driller Killer, they submitted it, and the BBFC in the UK were like, well, yeah, we can release it, but we'll have to basically cut that whole scene out of it. And the distributor lost interest because they were like, well, if we cut that scene out, we don't have a movie that is The Driller Killer, really. I mean, obviously there is drill attacks in the film, but if you take that segment out, you've got nothing. Right. I mean, even with, you cut all the bits out of like something like Zombie Flesh Eaters, you'll still get some zombie action, whereas with The Driller Killer, you cut that out, you're not left with very much. So even from then, 1979, he's kind of been doing that. And even when you see something like The King of New York, if you're expecting New Jack City and you get The King of New York, it's a very different film. I mean, it's an amazing film, and there are shootouts, there's drugs, there's girls, there's guns, there's all kinds of stuff, but it's just got this unusual like energy and tone, and it's got other things going on that even though that film has moreover elements that make it marketable and sellable and gives the audience what they want, it still isn't exactly what they were expecting or what they were probably wanting. And that's what he's done out throughout his career. And, thankfully, he's working with people like Ethan Hawke, with Willem Dafoe, all these like names that get movies funded. Like, their names are selling the movies, much like the way Nicolas Cage movies are. But, Abel's movies, they've just got some great stuff going on in them. And he's always going to be dividing audiences and things, and I hope he keeps making them. I mean, like I said, there was a long period where there was gaps between the films getting made, and now he seems to be at the age he is. I mean, I think he's about is Abel 70 now?
He's 70 now,
and he's in the last couple of years he's probably more prolific than he has been, in terms of the amount of films coming out in a small limited amount of time. He's more prolific than he's ever been, so fair dues.
Yeah, and I would say certainly, I would say of Tommaso, like capable of making contenders for his strongest work, period. I mean, I think that's something that's so surprising, because I don't really run into that a lot, where filmmakers that have been active for that long seem still capable of delivering their greatest work. That's usually not how it works with certainly with a lot of genre filmmakers. I'm used to them having their hungry and passionate years where they make their name, and then it's a job, maybe the inspiration fades. I feel like that is not the case with him. And even during the years where he was really kind of struggling in his personal life. I don't really feel like that ever harmed the work in a way that. Yeah, I used to wonder about that. I think I talked about this on the other episode of Directors Club I did about Abel Ferrara, but just I wasn't sure with things like The Blackout and New Rose Hotel if those more obscure elements were, the drugs taking an impact on his decision-making process, because they seemed like such confusing decisions. And it was at a time when he was showing up seemingly drunk on Conan O'Brien or recording a very rambling and bizarre Driller Killer audio commentary. It seemed like he was creating this public perception as somebody that was a little bit, I don't know what word you want to use, but definitely like eccentric character. And it wasn't clear, if his creative decisions were being somehow impacted by, hard living off camera. But and revisiting the films, all these years later, I don't think that. I thought that when these films were coming out, but now I just see it's him kind of breaking the rules in a very creative way to find new ways to tell kind of a more contemplative version of the thrillers that you think you're getting. I think at the time I just thought maybe he doesn't know that he's retold these scenes before in New Rose Hotel.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, look, over the years, I've heard so many Abel Ferrara stories, because a friend of mine moved to New York in 2003, and for years afterwards he was always ending up working on a film crew with someone who had worked on an Abel Ferrara shoot. And I was hearing for years just some wonderfully crazy stories. I say wonderfully, like as in they're just great to hear, and and then from a few people he's worked with, I've just heard some crazy stuff. And there is that great that almost like controlled chaos, or chaos as usual. I say controlled as in it's almost like a precise thing that someone needs it to thrive to create, I think.
Yeah.
Like Fassbender obviously would be someone who very much, had that going, and, Fassbender died at 38, but, I'm really happy for Abel that he was able to go in another direction, and yet the work that's coming out since he's moved to Italy and has a family now, and he's off to drinking drugs or whatever, and yet the work is coming out faster, and it's getting even more interpersonal, more overtly so. I mean, Tommaso, the scenes in Tommaso when it's Defoe in the Alcoholics Anonymous or the Addicts Anonymous, whatever, the group meetings,
Mm-hmm.
And like there's one story Defoe's character tells which sounds very much like something I've heard about what happened on The Blackout, or at least parts of it I could link to what I heard about The Blackout, and this other story came out, and I actually found it really heartbreaking. Like I actually got quite emotional hearing. I mean, you've got Defoe delivering these tales, but seeing threads that are relating to an earlier work, I mean, that it was quite extraordinary. And yeah, as you said, like at this point in his career, doing some of potentially his best films, like, and Siberia absolutely blew my mind when I saw it like last year. I thought it was incredible. And even like when Siberia, and it's interesting because Abel's done this maybe more times, but he's done this twice where he's taken a piece of music that's pre-existed before the movie, like a popular song, and he's reused it. So in The Bad Lieutenant, you have Pledge You My Love by Johnny Ace, who of course that song was also in Mean Streets.
Mm-hmm.
But Mean Streets also has Harvey Keitel in it. So you think of Harvey Keitel in Mean Streets as being one of Keitel's defining roles. And then Abel has the balls to take that song and put it in another movie with Harvey Keitel. And it's just as, if not more, associated with that actor in another movie, the same song in another movie, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, sure.
And then in Siberia, there's that wonderful scene where Defoe's suddenly dancing with all those children to Runaway by Del Shannon. And of course, which is amazing. It's one of the great pop songs of all time. Of course, Runaway by Del Shannon was the theme tune for Crime Story. which was a different version re-recorded by Doshan, if I remember correctly. But, so that's an interesting kind of loop there of something that's somewhat either self-referential or very specifically referring to something that is involving this person, like in terms of Keitel, one of his artists past, like in that way you can almost take it that it's like the way Bertolucci used Brando in like Last Tango in Paris. Like when you're watching Last Tango in Paris, you're not just seeing this guy Paul going through this stuff, you're looking at Brando, and every single role that Brando's played before him is that guy's history.
Yeah. This time I thought also just of the, you have associations with a film like Bad Lieutenant where like a character is succumbing to temptations to vice, like, succumbing to drugs, succumbing to casual sex, and even just, those themes of like spiritual questions, that I thought some of that, reoccurring here, but like in a completely different context. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's just like the way that these things that you think are indications of the old addictions, it's all transactional. It's all being used for leverage. It's not really about characters that have those problems. I one of the questions I asked Abel Ferrara, where I did not get an answer that I can include because the audio is just too rough, but he told me that the characters are in almost a Zen state of warfare, that they are like ascetics, like they don't have that same kind of compulsion towards the debauchery that you would see in film like The Blackout or film like Welcome to New York or a film like Bad Lieutenant. Like it's playing with that imagery, and I just was thinking about like how there's a drug deal scene where you see the sanitizing of all the money just felt like even though Abel is not part of that world, he still has that fascination with the culture and the ritual of that world and lingers on it in a way. But the only references to addiction in the dialogue are addiction to screens, which I thought was kind of a funny line.
Well, also, sorry, maybe this is coming out of left field or whatever, but one scene that I found really quite like fascinating and quite bizarre and in a wonderful way, and it mixed a lot of elements in terms of camera, filming, people watching people, sexuality, and just kind of transactions of some kind or another, or whatever, was the scene when Hawke's character is expected to have sex with that woman on the bed, and there's a camera going, and then that piece of music that was used in the Friedkin movie Jade, the Mystic's Dream, starts playing, and that in itself is all kind of an unusual situation, the way it's all unfolding and everything. And then there's that like solarized effect of, I think it's an image capturing behind Hawke, so you've seen Hawke's head from behind his neck, and it's like intense like solarization where it's like yellowy red, and it's like, what on earth, in a wonderful way. I don't mean like, what is this craziness, I just mean like, what's this about? It's really, I don't know, it was suddenly adding like another layer and making this situation kind of abstract and peculiar, and it was just, it just came out of nowhere. And for a film as well, because it's quite a nocturnal film, a lot of scenes shot with natural light, and then suddenly have this very gaudy, excessively processed image. Most of the time in the film, you only see those images like that when it is somebody watching something off a screen, and then you're looking at this action in the narrative, and then suddenly it's looking like it's something off a screen. And I mean, even something as simple as that, just the way it can kind of pull you out, because again, it's a scope movie, as I was saying, and I'd love to have seen it on a big screen, because even when I was watching it, it's a film you really have to watch with your surroundings in darkness to just like to tune into the kind of after hours vibe of the imagery, this very nocturnal imagery. And what I love as well is when you watch classic movies, of like, you know, nighttime shoots, like say something like The Warriors, for example. It's that beautiful fluorescent blues and greens and whatever, and it just looks so crisp and things. But, you know, in reality, a lot of street lights are yellow. You know, and you know, we don't have that kind of neon look anymore, unless you're somewhere like maybe Las Vegas or something. But you know, that kind of brightly lit thing you don't really see at night anymore. And a lot of like real lighting is kind of this quite ugly yellowy look to it and things, you know. And the film nicely captured that, because on one hand you're sort of seeing this almost dystopian espionage, you know, plot going on, and it's slightly surreal and slightly removed, and yet when you think of nighttime lighting in movies, it tends to be quite you know, that kind of beautiful crisp look to it, whereas it has that kind of real life yellowy, you know, low lit look to it. And even some of the scenes in the apartments in the indoor interiors are really kind of like low lighting and things, which are again uncomfortably naturalistic looking.
I thought about that too, because even though, you know, it's taking place all at night, even the interior scenes are pretty dark. Like it isn't like the scenes in apartments don't like necessarily change the vibe of nighttime murkiness that you have in the exterior scenes. Like it's all of a piece that way. It gives it like a feeling of all being stolen in one night in a city under lockdown, which, I mean, we know, you know, films are not made that way. It's, you know, it's a professional production, but it feels like a lot more of a stolen shot type of film than maybe it even is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also I love those kind of from dusk to dawn movies where it's like one night or whatever. I mentioned The Warriors there because that's one of those great movies that begins at night and it's only at the very end it becomes daylight, much like this. And when you tune into that nighttime vibe, like anyone who's had to, you know, drive at night, work at night, you know, shoot a movie at night, whatever it is, it's something that, you know, it's at night and you're sleeping in the day or whatever. Even though the actions you are doing might be the same actions as daylight, there is a different vibe when it's at nighttime. Even if you're indoors, even if all the lights are on, it's just a different vibe, and that movie captures that vibe, I think, which it just feels like 90% of the country or 95% of the country or whatever is asleep, but 5% aren't, and you're one of them. And that movie, especially with those like empty streets and things, like some of those moments very early on when it's Hawk just marching down the street at night, I don't know, I just felt quite anxious watching them. Not that like anything was going to happen, but it just felt uncomfortably too close to home, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let me play a brief interview I conducted with the writer-director Abel Ferrara. And this was recorded over Zoom, and we only had 10 minutes with Abel, and even within those 10 minutes, we had multiple technical issues. Abel's earbuds stopped working at one point, and the connection became so rough that really the last few minutes of his audio pretty much unusable. And I did include one question where you can make out most of what he's saying, but I'm going to tell you right now, listeners, that it's very rough. And after the interview clip plays, I'll reiterate what he said so you can make out what his answer was, because I thought it was compelling enough to keep it in the show. So here's my brief interview with Abel Ferrara. How you doing, Abel?
Yeah, good man. How you doing?
Good, good. Let's just jump right into it. Can you tell me a little bit about the origins of Zeros and Ones? The fact that it's so much of it is filmed entirely at night and dawn because of the curfew in Rome, it gives it like a very specific kind of feeling. I was just curious, did you know those restrictions going in when you were writing it?
Well, we were in the middle of the pandemic, so the idea of an empty city, I was living in. I was there for it. I was in the middle of it that the project came together. Some of these ideas I've been thinking about: news, fake news, Vatican, whether it's blown up, whether it's, it's a photo, what's real, what's not real, espionage, counter-espionage, that kind of thing. But then the vision of of that world was right in front of me, and sometimes like the most horrible thing, the pandemic, case in point, there's a silver lining to it. The silver lining is that 9 o'clock, there was a 9 o'clock curfew, and you can, you had the city to yourself. You could do all those shots, which are like, when could you ever do that? Never.
How often do you write with films? How often do you write films with a specific location in mind? Like, do you see dramatic possibilities wherever you go? I mean, as far as ideas for stories, or do you always build from character or theme? The reason I ask is because I know that you were shooting in Piazza Vittorio, where you live, and I love the documentary you made on that neighborhood. Were you thinking about this story? Was it influenced by your surroundings, and is that something that, as a writer, happens to you often?
Well, this is like, usually, we stay close to home just for, I guess, because I know it and I'm comfortable, and I get a feel for the locations by living there.
Yeah.
We don't travel well, although we do it. So this is kind of like a Piazza Vittorio. I don't know if it's a tree. It might be a trilogy, right? We did the documentary. I did Tommaso here, But then the elements of the Vatican, using the Vatican, I knew that was in there. I like the idea of the American soldiers there. It was kind of a homage to kind of those war movies I grew up with, American GIs. Quiet, tough dude. These are kind of very iconic and very, like a kind of a genre film for us, for me, in terms of inspiration. I don't know, in terms of execution.
Well, I know that you've introduced like a nonfiction or documentary element into a lot of your quote unquote fiction feature films. I mean, not even counting the straight up documentaries. I'm thinking of things like Bad Lieutenant or Dangerous Game, Gerard Depardieu talking out of character about Welcome to New York. And I thought of that when Ethan Hawke is being used out of character to bookend the story. Can you talk to me about that idea? Was that something that you always had in mind, or was that something that you had the footage and thought this was a great way to...
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Yeah, it's like that. We kind of used it like that. And like you say, Welcome to New York. Now, Welcome to New York. We used Gerard just talking about the movie, I don't know why we used it, because we actually were going to do that for Cannes. And then I'm thinking, well, it's a good way just to set everybody straight on what's going on here. Kind of quote unquote, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like introduce the movie, it's like a Rod Twilight, like Rod Serling. Okay, this is what's up, bro. And then we did it Siberia a little bit. Willem's voiceover in the beginning of that was in character, but it was also taken from his ideas on the movie itself,
Yeah.
So then in this pandemic, because we go all the festivals and all the places we usually go are all online, we're constantly doing these Vimeos. So it's almost like pandemic filmmaking. It's like part of a pandemic film. There's like a remote introduction. So then maybe we just put it in, and then we put it in the beginning. I'm thinking maybe it'll work at the end,
Yeah. Well, that actually brings up another question I had, was because the way most people are going to see your movies has changed so much over the years that you've been making films, from theater,
Right.
video, cable, I got to think that most people that saw Tommaso or Siberia, seeing this one, are probably going to be seeing it at home, maybe on a
Right.
laptop, maybe streaming. As a visual storyteller, do you think about that side of it when you're creating, or do you still think in terms of a big screen, in terms of how you think of the images? I mean, is the way technology is changing?
People watch things at home. Most of them have better fucking setups than they have in a movie theater.
Yeah.
Most of these people have, cool TVs and surround. You watch something on a high-end Mac, you're watching it high-end,
Yeah.
So, you sit close to your fucking laptop, you're seeing it on a big screen, believe me. You know what I mean? So how people want to watch a film is out of my control, but it doesn't, I realize it's a big difference, the look of it, the sound of it, not seeing it next to each other, but you still get a digital image in a movie theater. It's not like you're going to the movies and now you're going to see it, projected like old school style where, it's, you remember in the old days when you're watching a regular movie, there's black between those frames. You think? Right. Yeah. By the end of any movie, a non-digital old school movie, the audience is sitting in the dark for 10 minutes.
Right.
Okay. Really. If you put all those little moments that the chick is going through that the projector. So maybe those are the 10 minutes that, you know what I'm saying? It's like a totally different way of accepting the information as opposed to zeros and ones, digital, mathematical, as a constant assault on your, on your senses.
One thing I noticed you were doing with the camera in Zeros and Ones that I wanted to ask you about was the way the camera will push in and rather than make things more clear, it makes it more abstract. Like I'm thinking about when JJ is looking at the video looking for his brother, and rather than clarifying, pushing in only makes it more unclear, more abstract. Or when we're looking at the water torture and you push in so far that it becomes less disturbing, more and more like abstract, almost like nature. Is this something that you think about as a conscious strategy when you're making the film, or is this something that just feels right in the moment?
Well, it's part of the title of the film. I mean, what are you really seeing?
Yeah.
What is it? Blowing up the bed. You really blowing it up, like when the character says the other character shoot it like they so they believe it.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? How do you, he's being assaulted by images. They real, they not real. They hand him a photograph of him with, him and his brother with two Russian agents. He's a pro. He's a trained espionage agent. He knows it's Photoshop. Because it is Photoshop. That also we get Ethan twice with two girls that they, he never moved. So what are you really looking at? And that's what you're looking at. You look at a mathematical computation, an algorithm. You look at a series of zeros and ones. And the closer you get to it, what are you really getting to? More. And the closer you get to something, less aware of it you are. It's like Einstein. The more you observe something, all you're learning is about is the tool you're observing it with.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, what you're looking at is what that camera can record. You're learning more about the camera than you do about the people in front of it.
Okay, and that was Abel Ferrara and myself in conversation, and his answer to the question I had presented to him about how the camera moves in, pushing in, making things more obscure, more abstract. What his answer was that it's part of the title of the film. What are you really seeing? He's being assaulted by images. Are they real? Are they not real? They hand him a photograph of him and his brother with 2 Russian agents. And, he's a pro. He's trained in espionage. He knows it's photoshopped because it is photoshopped. So what are you really looking at? That's what you're looking at. You're looking at a mathematical computation, an algorithm. You're looking at a series of zeros and ones. And of course, you get to it, what are you really getting to? The closer you get to something, the less aware of it you are. It's like Einstein. The more you observe something, all you're learning about is the tool you're observing it with. So at the end of the day, what you're looking at is what that camera can record. You learn more about that camera than the people in front of you. So I thought that was worth preserving because I think that's what the film is really about. And I thought that was a great answer, and I wanted to keep it in.
Abel Ferrara, one of the great things about him in regards to his work, and this is becoming more and more overt, I think, as the more recent films come, is fact and fiction. And sometimes there's moments where, obviously in this movie, it begins with Ethan Hawke talking to the audience. Obviously in Welcome to New York, it begins with Depardieu commenting. And, he makes documentaries as well as features. And as I was saying earlier, when you go back to, say, Dangerous Game, there's the scene with Madonna's character and James Russo's character, and from what you can gather, what's happened is they're actors on screen making a film, and there's supposed to be like a sexual assault, and it appears after the scene from her reaction that assault was real on camera, and there's a lot playing with what's real and what's not real, what's being performed and what isn't, and that in itself is ambiguity. And for filmmakers to push ambiguity, especially in 2021, that's something that I think's unique. Maybe not unique, it's rare, because it tends to be now that for filmmakers to have a message, they tend to be a bit more blunt in making sure if they have a message that the subtext isn't subtext. It's more like on par with the plot,
Yeah.
And take his previous films, Siberia. What I love is the fact is when I saw Siberia, I saw it in Berlin, and every scene in the film is subtitled with English subtitles. Or is it German and English? It's subtitled so the audience, the local audience, as well as the international audience will be able to understand it. And I won't give away the ending, but there's this very key moment towards the end where there's a sentence spoken in a foreign language with no subtitle on the screen. At the time, I kind of assumed maybe that was a real language. It's just that they chose not to have a subtitle for it. But when I spoke to the scriptwriter, Chris Zoss, it's a made-up language. So the moment in the film that seems to be, like a philosophical phrase that is, explaining or summarizing everything that's gone on, it's literally gibberish.
Yeah.
So to do something like that, it's just like, what the hell? That takes balls. That's really pushing something, I think.
Yeah, well, you talk about the blending of documentary element within narrative fiction features. I mean, I think that there's footage in Driller Killer of homeless people that is documentary footage that is not actors. I mean, there's the ending of Bad Lieutenant where you have real New Yorkers who think they're looking at a dead body in a car, and how they react to it says a lot about that environment.
Yeah.
You have lots of blurring the line, and I think that gives the the fiction films an immediacy and a visceral quality that I think the aim is always to feel naturalistic. I think of a director like Robert Altman that felt like he was capturing things that were unscripted and part of real life that just were incorporated into this fiction plot. Ferrara, I think, certainly from like Bad Lieutenant on, where they don't even have the glossiness of the China Girl, King of New York kind of slickness. They really do feel like captured moments in the street, even though that there's a screenplay, that there's a filmmaker's guiding hand, but I think that rough around the edges feeling, obviously you look to people like Cassavetes for that kind of quality, or even Mike Leigh. I think that's why Ferrara kind of captured the imagination of certainly like a strain of film writers like Brad Stevens, that could see that there was something more than just reiterating the crime genre tropes. I mean, in a new way. It was the way those stories were being told was new.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I get the impression that with his cinematographer, what's his name, Bojan Bazelli, who shot King of New York and Body Snatchers, I think. With King of New York and Body Snatchers, which being Ferrara's only kind of gun-for-hire studio picture, like visually, they're so precise and really beautifully aesthetic qualities that are moving along the story. I mean, what I love about, say, King of New York in particular is the film has this grittiness yet dreamy, surreal quality. Like the film, when it begins, you have those wonderful shots of Walken looking out the window of his limousine after he's picked up from prison, and the light hitting off his face, the blue and the white is supposedly like the lights coming from the passenger side of the window of the car he's in, of the exteriors. Yet they just seem so unnaturally sort of slow, and it's quite poetic or something. And there's just some sort of like almost like heroine-esque sort of slowness to the movements or something. I don't know if that's quite what I'm summarizing here, but that movie uses like, a plot that's as old as the hills, the rise and fall of the criminal, the Little Caesar, the, White Heat, whatever. Mm-hmm. And yet there's just so many levels in it, and it's quite an incredible movie. And also, I almost got the impression that he got because he perfected it, maybe with like the visual look he was going for with King of New York, he got restless, and then from Bad Lieutenant onwards, he wanted it to be a bit loose and sloppy, Yeah. And because sometimes it is improvised, I think, and sometimes it's just the camera is almost searching for the action as well, rather than the camera being so stationed and the actors being so stationary,
Yeah, I think I always think of someone like Jess Franco, who had like a very slick style at one point and just jettisoned it for the raw immediacy of something that feels completely off the cuff, almost to the point where it might even feel unprofessional in places, because it's just that much more concerned with feeling real than feeling beautiful.
Yeah. The speed and the energy rather than the preciseness. Yeah.
Was there anything else that we want to say about this film? I know that we're trying our best to preserve any plot surprises, but still give people a sense of what it is. I mean, is there anything else you want to say about Zeros and Ones?
Well, I suppose I kind of want to highlight, because it's such a strong film about mood and themes and media and fake news and all these different elements. I suppose just one thing I just wanted to point out is I'm actually a huge fan of Ethan Hawke. I like when he was younger, I always thought he looked like a typically kind of handsome guy, and a lot of the movie roles when I was growing up, when I was in the 90s or whatever, I didn't find a lot of the movies he was appearing in to be as interesting, or for me at the time, and I didn't think they seemed as interesting. Of course, some of them, looking back now, I think maybe they are. But around a certain point, when he started aging and his face he has a great face. I think he has he's still a handsome guy, but he has a certain lived in quality as well. And like, I remember around 2009, 2010, there seemed to be like a string of movies where he was appearing in roles that would have been perfect for Warren Oates in terms of like he was playing these like losers. Like when you think of his introduction in Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, the final Sidley Lumet film, the character's introduction is literally, you have Philip Seymour Hoffman at the table of a restaurant or a bar, and it's Hawke appearing on a mobile phone or cell phone saying, "Yes, I'll have the alimony next week. I told you to have the alimony." And then as he's trying to hang up the phone, he accidentally breaks the phone. And he's just like effing and blinding, and that's his introduction. He's just like, and then you think of Brooklyn's Finest, which I wasn't too keen on the film as a whole. I didn't think it was great, but his story I really liked. Or there was another film, Staten Island. It was also made around that time. And though I just really found it fascinating how he was playing all these kind of roles and really maturing immensely as an actor with great range and presence and Boyhood. I thought he was very good in that as well. And I think he's really good in this. And of course, you've got the sort of somewhat sort of stoic, guy on a mission character, the main character. But then the brief moments where you have him playing his twin, like the different qualities of the two characters and how he plays them, I think are quite extraordinary. Like that whole monologue, and I'm saying this bit because it's quoted somewhat in I think it's quoted a little bit in the trailer I saw anyway, of the why isn't anyone setting themselves on fire anymore, or whatever it is he's saying, or I want to set myself on fire, why aren't people setting themselves on fire anymore? And I don't know, it's like even though you're looking at the same face, the two energies coming from the actor playing those two roles in the same movie, I don't know, it's just really fascinating. And I think with all the other stuff we've been talking about, and it's maybe the qualities of his performance can maybe be kind of almost forgotten, not dismissed or anything, or not acknowledged, but just maybe kind of forgotten about. But I thought he did a really good job. And I just wanted to highlight that because he's become one of my favorite mainstream actors. And it's no surprise to me that, like, two of the most prolific and exciting actors in like mainstream and independent American cinema are Willem Dafoe and Ethan Hawke at the moment. And it's great that they're doing films with Abel Ferrara. And I just wanted to acknowledge that performance because I just thought he was really good in it.
Oh, he's amazing in it, yeah. And I thought, it's funny, I don't know why I was thinking of it, because both Willem Dafoe and Ethan Hawke I also associate with Paul Schrader. I mean, Ethan Hawke did such a great performance in First Reformed, and this year both Ferrara and Paul Schrader have new films that evoke Abu Ghraib in different ways, that water torture element. And I thought that was an interesting coincidence, that these two East Coast mavericks that are both in the quasi post Scorsese kind of landscape of, East Coast auteurs of that generation. They're both making films that are still asking political questions and still being, confrontational in a way that is refreshing. I mean, because it's, they haven't mellowed with age at all.
No, absolutely. And, both Schrader and Ferrara are probably, I can't keep up with either of them. They've got something coming out every well, I was gonna say every year, but it feels like every 6 months or something. It's great, and like I said, each of the films that are coming out, they all have qualities that are similar but different. I mean, and the fact that these guys are like really taking the bull by the horns and making small scale movies. I say small scale in the realm of what's big scale these days, and having these interesting actors. Like the only actor that I can think of right now I'd love to see do a film with Ferrara is Matt Dillon. And the reason I'm thinking of him is because in that documentary about his neighborhood,
Piazza Vittorio?
Yeah. If you look like split second, there's a moment where the camera swooshes around and you see kind of Matt Dillon in the background hanging out with like Dafoe or something, and it's like, I want to see Matt Dillon in a Ferrara film.
I would love that as well. Yeah. I thought that was interesting how it was the neighborhood from Piazza Vittorio where they shot this. I mean, I think Tommaso was also shot there.
Yeah, I think so too. And again, it automatically almost felt kind of familiar because it's like, he shot it where he lives, and it's like, that's the thing about the new movie. If you know the films of Abel Ferrara and you've followed the work and you followed the recent stuff, as well as the older ones, there are a lot of different moments that you can link to other movies or different, whatever's real life and otherwise. But I'm hoping, even without that context, that there will be people who just take it as this rather peculiar film they've stumbled upon, and they unexpectedly get something out of it that they weren't expecting to see.
It's my hope as well. And, this film is, as we're recording this, it's going to be available digitally and on demand and in select theaters on Friday, November 19th, and available on Blu-ray and DVD on January 4th. Thank you so much for doing this conversation with me. I had a lot of fun, and I wanted to ask, where can listeners check out your work? I know that you are trying to wrap up, I don't know, like your 60th video essay or something like this year. I don't know what your schedule is like. What, where can listeners learn more about you other than my episode supporting characters with you?
Right, and you know what's so weird is that episode was a couple of years ago, and it just seems like so much has changed since. So it's like in the last 20 months, I've done 21 video essays.
Yeah.
And I think I have another 4 coming up in the next few months, and then probably some more next year. So in regards to where they can find out more about my work, well, I do post about my work on social media. Usually it's Chris O'Neill 99 or a variation of that on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And I also have a Vimeo account where I post some of the short films I've done, trailers, little bits and pieces, music videos. So yeah, I guess that's how I try to keep ahead of myself, or try to keep figure out what I do. Sometimes I have to go through my social media feed to go, oh yeah, just have I announced that yet? Oh yeah, I have. Oh yeah, oh great, yeah. So thanks for asking me to come on this. As we've discussed before, I'm a big fan of Abel Ferrara. I think his current work output is some of the best stuff he's done, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. And and also it's just great to see zeros and ones getting a release, because it is a strange film in some regards, but that's what Abel's always done. He's always done films that conventionally look like they're going to do one thing, but they go another way. And that's how people have discovered the classics like Bad Lieutenant and King of New York, and even to some extent the Addiction, because the Addiction's is a vampire film, but it's got something else going on. And The Funeral is like a period gangster drama, but it's got something else going on. And hopefully this film will find an audience, and no doubt by this time next year, there'll be probably another one, if not 2 more Abel Ferrara films coming out. And that's great. And, keep them coming.
No, I completely agree. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. And, I guess Jim will bring the Proper Directors Club back with the next episode. So thank you so much for listening.